So this presentation has been put together by Plymouth County Extension. Today we're going to be talking about amazing arthropods, or essentially this is going to end up more like a basic entomology program, and we're going to talk a little bit about how you might be able to find and observe insects in your own backyard. I'm hoping that you're a part of this presentation because you like insects, but if not, I'm hoping that you are going to be convinced otherwise at the end of this. My name is Blake Dinius. I work as the entomology educator for Plymouth County Extension. This is me with my hat and much shorter hair. I'm at the top of Mount Washington at this, and I promise you I did not drive all the way up to this mountain and park. I hiked all the way up. So I enjoyed doing a lot of things outside. That includes hiking and camping, but also looking at insects. At my previous job, I did research with honeybees. And currently, I deliver education, so I like to focus on teaching people about insects. And this can be in a library, in a school, it can be out on a walk, but you can just think of me as a giant bug nerd. So when most people see insects, even though I find this insect particularly cute and attractive, this is a black swallowtail caterpillar, they get this kind of reaction. They get really, really scared. They don't really like bugs. They just want it to go away. And we even show pictures like this where they're talking about burning their entire house down just to get rid of a single spider. There are even memes that are just kind of float around the internet that just always talk about how bad insects are. Like in this particular one on the top right, it says fear of insects. And it says combine them into a super insect, a wasp, a scorpion, and a mosquito, and I give you Mycoptera. The problem with this is that Mycoptera are they're very tame. They don't bite, they don't sting. That thing that looks like a stinger is actually used for reproduction. So even though they may look intimidating, they're not. And that's the general rule of thumb when it comes to most insects. Yet people are really, really afraid of insects, including this grown adult man who it just happens to be some kind of beetle flying at him, not gonna bite him, not gonna sting him, and he is petrified like a little baby. And then there are companies that take advantage of this. They try to spray your yard and they try to sell you products. They try to scare you. They say things like buzz, bite, sting, scream, or save your family from this, or don't let mosquitoes keep you indoors. Pests aren't shy about saying hello. There's a lot of things that they just try to make people really, really scared of insects, and then they sell you products to spray around your yard to get them away. And even it comes down to the word bug. So the origin of the word bug is unknown, but if you look back at a bunch of older languages, they all mean something that basically comes down to the word pretty bad. So in Middle English, it means something frightening or a scarecrow. In Welsh, it means a ghost or a goblin. And in German, it means goblin. So the word bug, it never means a good thing. And that even comes down to the word bug when we use it when we're not talking about insects, but talking about other things, like using the word bug to say you're going to annoy someone. If you look at this picture on the left, this kid says, "I'm not touching you," to his sister. That was me when I was a kid, and I have to say that is me even now. I still do that to my sisters, and I'm 36 years old. It's just something I never grew out of. But I do bug them, and bug can be something wrong when a computer, or a video game that you're playing, you might come across a bug that's basically like an exploit. And bug could also mean a cold. But insects they're found throughout our entire culture. They're found throughout our lives. Despite the fact that we don't like them, they're found literally everywhere. There's nowhere you can look where you're not going to see something connected to insects. The movies Jurassic Park, A Bug's Life, James and the Giant Peach, or even some older movies like The Fly or Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. They're even found in our songs, anything from La Cucaracha to the song Jimmy Crack Corn and I Don't Care, that is like a kid's song, talks about a blue-tailed fly. There are all these songs, even from little kid songs to grown adult songs. They're all found throughout. They're even found in our religion, in folklore and mythology. The ancient Egyptians used to think that bees grew from the tears of the sun god Ra. And there's even references in the Bible towards swarms and plagues caused by insects, and even guidance on how you might be able to eat insects. Some things say you can only eat the insects that fly, or in certain things like that. And these are found within the Bible. And probably the most famous folktale character is Anansi the spider. But they're not just older literary works, not just older stories, but new stories too. The Itsy Bitsy Spider, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, Charlotte's Web. But even despite the fact that insects are so hated by most people, they are very, very popular among scientists of all walks of life. Just many, many scientists that have made huge contributions to history and our current understanding of the world were entomologists. Charles Darwin, the father of evolution, studied insects. Alfred Wallace, the father of biogeography, studied insects. Carl Linnaeus, the reason we have words like Tyrannosaurus rex or rhododendron or hippopotamus, all those scientific names, they come from Carl Linnaeus, and he studied insects. And even in modern day terms, E.O. Wilson, who studies sociobiology and biodiversity, he is an entomologist. Even the fact that we have daylight savings time, where we turn our clocks back an hour in the fall and turn them forward in the spring, that system was actually proposed by an entomologist. Now, many more people, including farmers, benefited from that time change, and other people, including myself, suffer from it every single year. That initial concept was proposed by an entomologist. So there are many scientists, the good and the bad, that do affect our daily lives. And the reason behind this is because insects make up the bulk of all mammals, no, not mammals, the bulk of all animals on the planet. Vertebrates like mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians make up less than 5% of all the animals in the world. The rest of the animals, and insects and arachnids are animals, are invertebrates. So most people, they say, you talk to them, they're like, do you like nature? Do you like animals? And they'll say yes. And then if you ask them if they like insects, and they'll say no. So how can you like nature and animals and hate insects if insects make up 85% of all animals? That would be like saying you like dogs, but you hate all breeds except for German Shepherds. That doesn't make sense, you know? You can't like animals and hate bugs. It's not possible. You can say you like vertebrates, and that would be true, but you can't say you like animals. And this is going to include a lot of interesting looking creatures that you can find in your backyard, like this fiery searcher is a really fun ground beetle that you can find. And this beetle you'll find will consume a lot of things, including gypsy moth caterpillars, which a lot of people don't like having around their yard. And these are really big. They're like a giant beetle. They're really fun to find. The ambush bug you can find perching on a lot of your flowers. I think this insect looks a lot like, almost like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle that's wearing a backpack. They've got almost like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle face. And I think that they're really fun insects. They're really small, but you'll find them perched on flowers like goldenrod, for instance. Rosy maple moths are a very common moth this time of year. They're really fuzzy. They're pink and yellow, so what's not to like? And they don't even have a mouth, so they can't even eat, so they can't bite you either. So you can hold them, you can pet them. They might not like being pet, but you can do it, and they're not going to bite you. The scorpion fly, like we went over before, this is completely harmless, and it's actually a very rare insect. So if you do find one, consider yourself lucky. They're really hard to find. In the photo like this, very, very hard to take. The walking stick is, again, kind of a really hard to find insect, but they're plant feeders, so they're not going to bite you. They're really fun to hold. I really enjoy walking sticks, and you can find them in similar habitats as you found the ambush bug. They feed on goldenrod. So this fall, if you look in fields and stands of goldenrod, you might be able to find a walking stick. Springtails, these are not true insects. They're actually considered a different category of hexapod. It's because they have their mouth parts inside their body, not on the outside of their body like an insect. The banded argiope, you might find this in the fall. These spiders are very large. Sometimes people call them garden spiders, and they like to build their webs in a certain fashion, usually facing east and west. So if you look at the horizon where the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, you can see the spider build the web across that line. And they usually do this, but not always. But they're fun to see, and they're the most common in the fall where they're very, very large. But they're harmless. They're not going to bite you or attack you. Giant ichneumon wasps. These have been really common this year throughout Massachusetts. That doesn't mean that they're common in general. They're just more common now. So finding these would still be a pretty good find. That long stinger that you see in the back, it can't actually sting you. What they use that for is to lay eggs inside the bark of trees. They're actually looking to find small grub-like organisms, so either beetle larvae, and they're looking to lay an egg inside that beetle larvae with that long tail of theirs. It's called an ovipositor. But they're not going to sting you, so you don't need to worry. The ebony bog haunter. It's a really rare dragonfly, but you can find all sorts of dragonflies this time of year flying around, and dragonflies have all different kinds of behaviors, and they'll fly and fly and fly for hours sometimes all day long. Grasshoppers you can find in your own backyard. This is a red-legged grasshopper. You can tell by its red legs. And these you can find, they're going to be small this time of year. They're called the nymphs. But as we get towards the fall, they're going to become larger and larger and larger. Hummingbird clearwings are really fun. They look a lot like hummingbirds. You can find them nectaring on flowers. These are actually a kind of moth, a kind of sphinx moth. Bugs. This is another one of my favorite kind of bug, Bugs Bunny. And my second favorite kind of bug, the VW bugs. I apologize for the bad humor, but not really apologize. I'm going to keep doing it. So for undiscovered insects, if you compare them to mammals, you can see that there are many, many more undiscovered insects. There are 303 undiscovered mammals, for instance, but there are over 30 million undiscovered insects. So that just kind of clues you in at how many different species you have. You could maybe devote a year or so to memorizing all of the birds in Massachusetts, and you would know them all, every single bird in Massachusetts. You would have to dedicate several lifetimes to knowing all of the insects in Massachusetts. It's just not possible. And for me, someone like me, for instance, I don't know all of them, but I typically know how to identify them and get myself there using a key or a field guide. Insects are really important to our world. E.O. Wilson, the guy that we consider the father of biodiversity and sociobiology, he called them the little things that run our world. So even though they're so small, they play a huge part in our overall lives, and because there are so many of them. They fill in all these little gaps, they're like the little tiny parts that keep a clock working. So without insects, we wouldn't have a lot of cool things that we really like. Chocolate and pumpkin pie for most everyone, and if you're adult, beer. So all these things would go away without insects. And they're found on every continent, including Antarctica. They're everywhere. You just have to want to look for them. We typically think that they're going to be found in warm environments like this Amazon rainforest. And while that might be true, we do see a lot of really colorful species in a lot of warm environments near the equator. You can find them in cold environments like this Arctic woolly bear that lives in the high Arctic. And this woolly bear grows over the course of several years, where it grows through freezing and thawing periods, and it grows for a very, very long period of time. There are even things like ice crawlers that are at the tops of mountains and at the edges of glaciers. And these are insects that only live in those spots. If you remove them from a glacier, they can no longer survive. There are insects that live in desert oases, like this mosquito, Anopheles sargenti. And there are even insects that live inside pitcher plants, like this other mosquito, Weomia smithi. It actually only lives inside pitcher plants. And the pitcher plant, this particular pitcher plant, can't digest anything on its own. It actually needs the mosquito to first digest the food. And then when the mosquito kind of excretes waste and poops and pees inside the pitcher plant, the pitcher plant eats that. There are other insects called sea skaters, and these are a kind of water strider that you might see in your pond, except these live on the open ocean. So they're even in marine environments. Sometimes people think that insects aren't in marine areas, and that's true. They're not found in deep oceans underwater, but on the surface of the water of open oceans, you still do find insects. There are insects found in man-made structures, like this Asian tiger mosquito has well adapted to living inside tires. And there are even insects that live inside the bodies of other insects. So they live so many different locations. That includes the butt of this paper wasp. So this insect called a twisted wing parasite, it even has like trilobite eyes on the right. You can see this insect on the right. It lives, it grows and develops inside the butt of this paper wasp here. So diversity is all around you, just waiting to be discovered. You really just have to go out there and look. On a given day, on a day like today, for instance, I might be able to go outside and in 30 minutes find at least 15 or 20 different species of insects, just in my own backyard. And so it's just one of those things like knowing what you're looking for, knowing it's out there, and knowing how to look carefully at the world around you. So how do you get started? What do you need? Like, so what are some equipment that you can use to just get started? If you just wanted to go outside in your yard and start looking for insects. You don't necessarily need really fancy collecting equipment. You don't necessarily need a bug net. The thing that you need most of all is a pair of binoculars. This is going to help you more than anything. And it doesn't need to be expensive. It can be something like this pair of binoculars, the Celestron Nature DX. Or it can be a cheaper pair, like especially if you like the color pink, you can get these Pentax binoculars. And the Celestron's one on the left might be about $120, and the ones on the right might be about $30. And so they're still really good. They are gonna vary a little bit in terms of what quality of image you're gonna see, like how good it's gonna show up in the binoculars. But the cheaper ones are still gonna work, and they're still gonna be better than just walking out with nothing. So the quality of the lens is really important. If you look at the picture on the left and picture on the right, bad binoculars are going to look like the picture on the right, and the good ones are going to look like the picture on the left. The magnification power, so sometimes you'll see numbers on the binoculars. They'll say like 7 by 32 or 7x 32. What does that mean? The 7 is how many times it's magnified. So this butterfly, when you look through the binoculars, is going to be 7 times bigger because it says 7 on it. If it's an 8, it'll be 8 times bigger, and then 10 times bigger. So that's what that first number means, is how many times bigger it's going to be. So the bigger number, the bigger it's going to appear. And so but that might be a reason to get a bigger number. But the bigger number is also a little bit of a drawback, because sometimes you don't want it to be that close. Sometimes you want it to look a little bit smaller, especially if you're looking at a really big insect, and you put on a pair of binoculars, and all of a sudden all you can see is its head. So sometimes you only want it to be a 7 or an 8. You don't necessarily need to have a 10. The other thing is that you want a good, what they call minimum focus distance. So if I were to look at an insect that's right in front of me, if I don't have a good minimum focus, if it only focuses from like 20 feet away, and I'm looking at something that's right in front of me, it's going to look really bad. And I might have to back way up in order to see that insect. But if I have a good minimum focus, I can look at something that's directly in front of me and it will still look really good. So the minimum focus distance is really, really important. Probably the most important thing when looking at insects. The second number that you might see in binoculars, where it says like maybe 8 by 42 or 8x 42 or 7x 30, that bigger number where it says 42, that is how big what they call the objective lens size. So that's going to affect how much light gets let through. And so when you look at these two images, the one on the left has a bigger objective lens. So it's going to let in more light, the image is brighter. And the one on the right is probably going to have a smaller objective lens. And so that's going to appear darker. And the bigger the objective lens, the bigger the binoculars. So if you wanted a pair of binoculars that just fit nice in your pocket, it's going to have a really small number. But that's okay because it's more portable. It's a trade-off. Other things to consider, you want waterproof. That's really important. And fog-proof is really important too. When using the binoculars, you really don't want to have to be afraid to get up close, because sometimes you're not going to be able to see the details unless you get really, really close to that insect. And so when you're looking to try to get that close, you want to walk really slowly. You want to pay close attention to your shadow, make sure your shadow doesn't scare that insect, and just have a little bit of patience, because there are some insects that you just are never going to get that close to. That picture of the scorpion fly, those are some insects that are really rare, and they're also really, really hard to get close to. So there's some things that are just going to be really hard to chase after. If you've ever played Pokemon, they're like almost like a Mewtwo or like a Mew. They're just gonna be really hard to catch, like a legendary Pokemon. So do you collect or do you not collect? That's very debatable. We're not going to discuss it too far now, but the bottom line is that there are some advantages to collecting and there are others not to. I would say when just getting started, you just want to focus on just observing. You don't have to worry too much about collecting. So now that you've found an insect, what do you do next? How do you know what you're looking at? The first thing you can use is a set of keys. These are the most accurate, but they're really, really cumbersome, and they're really hard to understand, and sometimes they require microscopes. Like if you look at this thing that I pulled from a key, it says pronotum glossy with sides rectilinear, whatever that means. Often angulated, again, that is kind of weird. Subparallel, subgenital, like all these things are just very complex terminology, and they're not easy to understand. They don't really come with pictures all the time, and they can be confusing. So you can find keys online, but the best thing to use is a good field guide. These are just going to be something you can get at a bookstore or on Amazon or even at a library. They're much easier to use than keys, and they're going to cover almost all the species that you're going to come across. So these are some really good examples of some good field guides. In general, the more specific you can get, the better off you are. Like if you look at this blue book right here, it says A Field Guide to Dragonflies and Damselflies of Massachusetts. So what's good about this is it's not all insects, it's just one group, the dragonflies and damselflies. And then it's specific to a state, Massachusetts. So that means it's going to be more in depth and cover those particular species in far greater detail. Another book like this, Caterpillars of Eastern North America. It's only Eastern North America, and it's only caterpillars. So it's going to be better than if you were to get a book that's just talking about all kinds of caterpillars found through all of North America. There are other things like phone apps, and these have pros and cons. So one, they're very portable. They can always be on your phone, and they're good for most species. And I think that they're probably going to get a little bit better than even field guides in the next few years. So, but the biggest drawback with the phone apps is that you need a photo for identification, which means it's something that you could identify that's flying through the air, that you can't use a phone app for that. Or something like the scorpion fly, like I showed, you might not be able to get close enough to take a picture, but you might be able to see it from a distance. So the field guides are good in that you can know the things in your head, and you don't need an actual photo. But the phone apps have other advantages, like them being like very extremely portable. The other problem with the phone apps is that you don't know you're wrong unless you already know the right answer. So if I was looking at something and it misidentified something, I would have no idea that that was wrong unless I confirm that with, say, a field guide or someone in person that double checking that identification for me. So you're still going to need things like field guides and people to help you identify things. And for example, there are these insects. So there's two insects called Juvenal's dusky wing and Horace's dusky wing. Now a phone app might call them the same thing, or they might confuse them. They look very, very similar to an untrained eye. But someone who is good at identifying insects might ask questions like, what time of year was it flying around? Or they might look for certain things like the scaling on the sides of the wings. The one on the left has slightly more gray scaling than the one on the right. And that could be some factors that help you differentiate between the species. And that's going to come with time, with reading things like a field guide and with talking to experts that know what they're doing. When you're looking for insects, it's really important that you try out very different habitats because insects are going to be greatly affected by the kinds of things growing in them. If you think about a monarch butterfly feeds on milkweed, but the milkweed only grows in certain soil and with certain sun. So the monarch butterfly, believe it or not, is dependent on soil and sun because its food source is dependent on that. And so that's going to be true for a lot of different insects. Meadows and yards, you find certain species like cabbage whites, sulfurs, a lot like American coppers. Deciduous forests, you might find question mark butterflies, comma butterflies. In pine barrens, you're going to find all kinds of different things like buck moths. Wetlands are different. Freshwater aquatic habitats are different. Coastal beach barriers are different. And then there's this thing called an ecotone. It's a special kind of habitat. What they're talking about is an edge of a habitat. So like, let's say, for instance, where your yard meets a forest, this habitat, the edge where it overlaps between your yard and the forest, that's a special habitat called an ecotone. And there's even different species just found in that edge. For instance, some of my favorite places that I like to go are Myles Standish State Forest in Plymouth and Carver. Here you can find things like this eastern pine elfin and this brown, actually can't remember what kind of butterfly this is, but I think it's a brown elfin. And then this rainbow scarab up top can be found in Myles Standish State Forest. So very different kinds of insects. The Douglas S. Westgate property in Wareham is another good place to go. And if you look at this, it's not a pine forest. This is more like a reclaimed bog, and you're going to find a lot more like wetland type insects here. You can find things like a lot of dragonflies you're going to find there, some forest butterflies like this common wood nymph at the bottom, or this little wood satyr at the top. And you're even going to find, I found things like red admirals here. A lot of, and I've even found, you know, the scorpion fly that I was talking about as being rare. I found scorpion flies at Douglas S. Westgate property. And so you can find a lot of interesting insects here. There's another place called Cumberland Farms, and it's not the gas station. This is actually a place in Middleborough and Halifax, and it's actually a real farm. It's called Cumberland Farms IBA. And in this particular area, you're going to find, if you look at it, it's a lot more meadows and what you're talking about, ecotones, where you have the meadow kind of meets a forest. You're going to find a lot of interesting species here. I found black and yellow garden spiders here. I found a lot of crickets here. I found a lot of grasshoppers here, and even different kinds of butterflies I found here, common buckeyes. So you can find lots of things at Cumberland Farms IBA, but you cannot find Bigfoot. So just different things like the butterfly on the top right is what we call a common buckeye. It's very, very cool looking. The one on the left is called a sulfur butterfly. And then the bottom, we've got different kinds of grasshoppers. So if you're looking to try to find your own cool spot, more than just the three that I recommended, you can look on Google Maps. And this is what I do. I play around with Google Maps and I look at it, I'm like, oh, this looks like a meadow and it's kind of near a forest. Maybe that's a good ecotone. And then I'll drive all the way out there and I'll check it out. I'll also compare it with something called Oliver. And this is actually Massachusetts GIS. So it's GIS software, and it will show you things like barrier beaches and different areas that you can look at. So what I'll do is I'll have Google Maps in one window and I'll have Oliver in the next, and I'll just kind of compare the two and see where they kind of overlap. And then I'll be like, okay, this looks like a good spot that I might want to find a tiger beetle. And then I'll drive out to that place and I'll look for the tiger beetle. It's a little bit like Pokemon in that regards. It can be really, really fun to kind of explore your area. If you're having trouble getting something identified, you can always go on Facebook. Facebook is a really good place. There are a lot of people ask questions on Facebook. You can go on Reddit. There's a Reddit subforum called What's This Bug? But when you do post an image, make sure that you say where you found it and the date you found it, because these can be really important things for identifying something. There's a kind of butterfly that looks almost exactly the same, and they're different species. There's about 3 or 4 different species in Massachusetts. One is found early in the year, one is found right around June, and one is found right around July. And so it's really, so knowing that time period can be important for identifying the species. And you can contact me. You can always shoot me an email. I'm happy to try to identify something. I might ask you for further photos. So if you do have the specimen, make sure you save it in a jar. And one thing that you can do to take really good pictures is you can take that jar, you can put it in the freezer for about 30 seconds. It will slow it down. You can open up the jar, take a really good, maybe 2 or 3 photos. It's going to warm up really quick, and then cap the jar again, and then you can let it go. And if at first you don't succeed, try again. Insects can be very frustrating, but also very rewarding to finally be able to observe and identify. At this point, I'm going to ask for any questions. I'm going to stop the recording. I know that there were some questions that were asked beforehand, and we're going to address those now.